Testing 1, 2. Oh boy. 1, 2, 3. Testing. Okay. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info. Welcome to Behind the Wall for the Talladega show. Let me make sure. I've had all kinds of audio problems setting this up. So if we're getting some bad interference, let me know in the chat and we'll jump into the race coverage here pretty soon. Alrighty. I want to make sure I'm not blowing anybody's ears out here before we get into this, because there's going to be plenty to talk about. That is for sure. All right. Are we good? Just make sure we're good. I'm getting some, okay, much better audio. Okay, good. I'm getting, my thing here is showing some interference. I'm just making sure we're not getting a lot of fuzz, because I can still mess with that and make sure that's not too bad here. Much better, okay. Good here? Okay. Statically when you don't talk. Okay, that's not good. There's some static. Okay, there's something going on with this here. Okay. We're going to get off to a little bit of a slow start here with this one, folks. I apologize. Can I bring this down a little bit? Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, a bit crunchy, but volume is good. Okay, so at least we're not there. Yeah, it suddenly decided that it did not want to work. No fuzz? Okay. Sounds like you have a cold. Oh, that's not good. See, and my sound card is messed up to the point where I can't hear. I could hear this, but if I pull up the video, I can't hear it. So that's kind of a big issue. So I have no idea how it sounds to you guys. That's kind of the big problem. Voice echoes a bit. Okay, that's not good either. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm seeing it on this one here. If I need to, where can I get that fixed? Can I fix this? That would be good to fix this. Why is it like that? Staticky when not talking. Okay. Well, I guess I'll just have to talk constantly. Maybe that's going to be the problem. Okay. Audio input. Global settings. I had a channel on here that was even worse. It seemed like it wasn't going to do it right. Oh my goodness. Add 206. Maybe a grounding problem. Yeah, maybe there's a problem there. Let's see. Let me check. Let me check our connections. I'm going to jump aside here. I'll do the loading screen again here, and we'll jump back into it. I'm just going to check and make sure everything's hooked up correctly, and then we'll take a look again, and we'll see if it's good. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back in just a minute. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I checked the connections. I think we're okay. We might just have a little ghost in the system here. And given how this race and this weekend went for the folks at Talladega, that's probably pretty appropriate for the tone of this here. So I do apologize if you got a little bit of feedback here. Hopefully we don't have the echo from earlier. I'm just checking. I've had times where I've had duplicate audio streams here. I just see the one, but there is some feedback on that. So I'm not sure what I can do on that. I tried rebooting this and this did not work correctly. Okay. So, all right. I got it. It's always the big shows that end up having all the problems here. But oh well. We're gonna just try to power through this, and then we'll go into this. I think probably going to be no shortage of discussing this here, and hopefully we'll have this no echo but some static. Okay, good. We still have the hiss. Yeah, I have no idea what's doing that. Something's going sideways with my sound card, and it's been a problem for a while, and it's unfortunately not doing anything on that. Yeah, still some static. Well, in the meantime, yeah, if it gets worse or if it's something like that, definitely let me know in the chat and we'll jump into this. And then I could turn the main down a little bit. I don't know if that's going to do much because I don't see the feedback on the board here. That's the bizarre part. Usually it would show and then you could actually tune that out, but it's not ideal. Okay, yeah. Well, let's see here. So we will start fresh here. Yeah. Just blame things in general here. Okay. All right. So, starting fresh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Behind the Wall. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info coming at you after the conclusion of the Talladega Cup Series race, the Geico 500. We're unofficially pending the results of post-race inspection. Kyle Busch has his second win for Richard Childress, winning with the team that finished last in this race last year with Tyler Reddick, finishing over Ryan Blaney, Chris Buescher, Chase Briscoe, and Brad Keselowski. These results very tentative given the result of this race, which was, again, a series of increasingly spectacular and frustrating pileups that led to the race finishing under caution in overtime anyway. So that is going to be the situation there for a lot of the drivers in this field here. Not a lot of people particularly happy about this one, myself included. We had a perfect mix of a race that did not seem like it wanted to get going at the beginning, with drivers that were running too wide and not being able to pass each other, and drivers having relatively minor situations like Michael McDowell's team, where they were trying to fix a issue with the right rear after a spin on lap 2, could not get back into contention at all. Now, while I was pleased that there weren't a whole lot of cautions that just constantly stacked up the middle part of the race, I think it could be forgiven from a lot of viewers that the competition wasn't particularly as exciting there for much of this race. We did actually have some surprising runs along the way, one of them being a battle between both of our top rookie candidates in both Noah Gragson and Ty Gibbs, who at different points of this race, and even all the way up until like the last couple of restarts, were actually battling for, if not a top 5, certainly even a chance at the win. Unfortunately, both of them suffering different misfortunes at the very end of the race, and so are not in your top 10 at the end of this here. Again, the rest of the top 10 pending the results of post-race inspection. Eric Jones in the 6th spot, William Byron in 7th, Christopher Bell in 8th, Daniel Suarez 9th, and Todd Gilliland rounding out the top 10. J.J. Yaley just outside the top 10, taking home an 11th place finish for Rick Ware Racing, taking over the number 51 car this week as Riley Herbst was driving the number 15 in what was Herbst's first Cup start since the Daytona 500, where he finished 10th. So a good run for the Rick Ware effort. Chase Elliott, who's back, don't you know, is finished back in the 12th spot. Tyler Reddick, after bouncing off the pit road entrance, it seemed like he was going to be done for the day, finishing in the 13th spot. Alex Bowman in 14th, and Denny Hamlin is almost certainly going to have a very interesting podcast this week after a 15th place finish and not being able to reel this one in either. Ricky Stenhouse, Ty Dillon, Justin Haley, BJ McLeod in the 19th spot, and Eric Almirola rounding out your top 20. Almirola had another very fast car out there. Seemed like he was going to have a really good shot at it, trying to build on the runs that Stewart Haas had at Martinsville last week. They finally seemed to kind of start turning around. Yeah, it was kind of a little bit of a mix of both ends on this race, I got to say. It's unfortunate it turned out the way that it did at the end, because I think really if, the few times we did see the drivers actually trying to go 3 wide and actually battling for position, like at the end of the stages, they were putting on a good show. And I'm starting to think like maybe they can actually have a green flag finish where, it doesn't just completely bubble over. But unfortunately, things didn't quite play out that way. Certainly some drama at the end there as to whether or not Kyle Busch was going to have enough fuel to make it the rest of the way and reach the finish line. But Kyle Busch, again, pending the results of post-race inspection, with his second win of the season and taking the number 8 back to victory lane once again at Talladega. On the opposite end of the field there, your last place finisher was Austin Dillon, the first last place run for the number 3 at Talladega since 1992, when the late Dale Earnhardt scored the 4th of his 5 last place finishes in the Cup Series. Austin Dillon involved in an accident in turns 3 and 4 that involved him as well as Zane Smith. Austin Hill got a piece of it there. A couple other drivers involved. Harrison Burton, almost said Harrison Rhodes, spinning out when he was battling for the lead there. Kind of started to have his day kind of go south after that point there. But Dillon ends up being your last place finisher, taking it from Michael McDowell, who had held it pretty much since the start of the race after his bizarre series of issues with the right rear of his car. McDowell making some stops at the very end of this race. And where actually did he finish? 35th, 7 laps down, on the same lap as Noah Gragson, Kyle Larson, and Ryan Preece, who were involved in one of the next to last pile up here that pretty much finished the race the way that it happened there. But Austin Dillon, your last place finisher there, bracketing the field there for Richard Childress. And again, pending the results of post-race inspection, that will be your story on the last car page later tonight for our Cup Series review of the race there. Zane Smith in the 37th spot got involved in that incident. Harrison Burton gets involved in a later accident there, taking out the 36th spot. Michael McDowell in 35th after a pretty disastrous run there for the driver that's always very favored on super speedways, but did avert his 4th last place finish at Talladega alone in the Cup Series. Ryan Preece completing that group there after a very savage hit there at the end. And I guess that's probably one part that we could really delve into initially, was that collision between Ryan Preece and Kyle Larson. Coming off the next to last restart there, you have Noah Gragson picking the outside lane, running against Ryan Blaney, trying to pull off the victory there in overtime. Seemed to be his only move. Gragson in the stage 3 was holding on to about the 2nd or 3rd spot on the inside line, looking for a much needed turnaround for the Legacy Motor Club, which is really kind of been off this year compared to Petty GMS's era last season. I don't know if, there has been some discussion about possibly some turmoil going on at that team. What's the role of Jimmy Johnson versus Richard Petty in the organization? What resources are being moved around, and what the situation has been. But regardless, both Gragson and Eric Jones at points during this race as well were able to kind of work their way up there. But Gragson had a good run at the end, was about 2nd or 3rd in line. The late race restart allowed him to pick on the outside lane where he had Ross Chastain behind him. And I know I'm getting some heat on this, but I'm going to kind of stand my ground on it. First and foremost, regardless of the actual outcome of it, a terrible waste for Gragson himself to not be able to have the benefit of that good run out there for both driver and team that have certainly needed it. I know there's been a lot of focus there at the same time, but we have had a race here where everybody was too wide for most of those green flag runs, and if you were brought into a third groove, if you were certainly up front, as Gragson himself was fighting for much of this race, you pretty much had to stay in line. If you're going to be knocked out of your line running the outside lane, there was just no way you were going to be able to stay up there and actually contend for the lead. Admittedly, a desperation move. I will say he was very aggressive in doing so. I'm sure in his mind, he was probably thinking, okay, well, look, try to swing left and either close the door on Chastain, or if he's already there, as it turned out that he was, try to side draft him and try to minimize the effect of him dropping to the back of the field. But it's very clear from how this race was playing out that if you were shaken out of those 2 primary lines, you were just toast and you weren't going to win at all. Now, it's a very valid point. Do you want to be in a situation where you're just going to completely total your car, especially a car that's this good in a season where your team is struggling this much? Yeah, that's a bit short-sighted. But man, the kid's going for the lead here. The kid's trying to go for the win. And you never know how many opportunities you're going to have, even as a rookie, to be in that situation out there. And I'm sure with the amount of activation that Wendy's was doing at the track this weekend, much like they did last year when he was driving for Beard Motorsports, I think it could be forgiven that he had actually been as aggressive as he was. And honestly, a lot of the discussion there of that restart and the fact that Kyle Larson got in the back of Ross Chastain and caused him to have that massive move, I don't buy the explanation that, Chastain just had to drive right through the the 42 and nerf him out of the way and make it a 3-wide situation in the first place. Chastain, could have had just as much control staying behind the 42 and trying to work something out himself there. What those options were and, how much of that, yeah, I guess that's up for debate. But again, I have a hard time being that critical on Gragson himself for that situation when everybody's going for the win in overtime and him just getting drilled at that point. And yeah, I guess if focus could be looked back over to Kyle Larson and how much of a restart he was getting and pushing Chastain into that, it was just a mess. And you knew when it was going to go 3 wide with those drivers that somebody was going to do one thing or another. It seemed like, it was even pretty kind of close hole that Chastain was sticking his nose through to begin with there. Even before Gragson started to come down. So at most, what I would concede is like maybe a 50-50 or a 60-40 between the two of them in creating that huge stack up there in a mess and then throwing Kyle Larson into it there too. But I'm not going to put 100% of that on Gragson. I'm really not. And I'm trying to be as impartial as I can on that. But again, there does come a point with Chastain. He is entering this Ernie Irvan period of his career where he's the common denominator. And we've seen this so many times, over this last year, and Denny Hamlin's been outspoken about it. And it's been one situation after the other. If you just say, oh, well, this one wasn't him this time, it's like, well, I'm not so sure. So, that's kind of my side of that. So at the same time here too, we have this. So after that wreck happens, Ryan Preece is coming up on the scene. Kyle Larson slides up from the apron, clear across the track, and Preece just absolutely slams into Larson. Terrifying impact there. Preece really from the onboard camera, the 41, he gets jostled around really, really hard within the driver's cockpit itself there. Looked like he was trying to find a hole that he can kind of work his way through. Was just starting to get, hit the gas again to make it through. Worst possible time for the 5 to slide right in front of him. The two of them hit into the passenger side of Larson's car, and we see some very noticeable and significant damage. And kudos to Fox for actually pointing this out and not just ignoring it and not just kind of letting it go by here. That there was apparently a massive bend in some part of the driver's side door frame there on the number 5 car there, and very startling. I know that these cars, there's a lot of technology that's been advanced in that respect, that you have the foam in the doors and, a lot of that design, especially for, driver's side hits. Wear my Bobby Allison shirt here today. When Allison had his accident with Giacomo in 1988, and he got hit in the driver's door, which resulted in, the serious injury that ultimately ended his Cup Series career. If you look at pictures of that 12 car, it looks like a wrecking ball smashed into the side of that car. I mean, it's basically peeled open from the driver's side of it there. Thankfully, this wasn't a situation that was not quite that bad, but to see that part of the body deform in that sense should be very eyebrow raising. It's not often that we see that in the Cup Series. Usually that part on the driver's door through either the foam or the frame that's there usually holds its shape, whether it's a driver's side, passenger side, or whatever. And we see impacts that'll happen where a driver gets T-boned or something like that happens, and it'll actually kind of maintain its shape. Maybe the actual form of the door or the sheet metal is able to kind of plaster against it there. It was you think about older wrecks with cars back in the early 1990s after Bobby Allison's accident. A car would hit a retaining wall or anything, and you'd see the body kind of plaster against that frame there, and it would almost like show the indentation of the cross members and everything that was behind it there, because that would hold its shape. And that would be the important thing to see that in this situation. I guess we just haven't had a situation under exactly these circumstances from last season to this that has really kind of created this. And but and of course, there's been a lot of discussion about, of course, the strength of this car and how inflexible it's been, and the hazards that are very much a risk from the deformation of the front or the rear of the car. We think about J.J. Yaley's incident in Richmond, where he was spun and backed into the outside wall, and there was actually some crumpling there for the rear of the car in a more traditional sense, showing that the body was absorbing some of that. I don't know if that extended into how the frame was treated versus last year versus this year, or if that was different, but it was very alarming to see that. And I don't want to just constantly be ringing the bell about one thing or another, but I mean, obviously everyone saw it. And that's something that NASCAR really needs to take a close look at. I don't know if they're planning on taking that car to R&D like they've done with Blaine Perkins' car in the Xfinity Series after his wreck yesterday. But I would hope that it's something that they're going to take a closer look at because, again, it was very fortunate that it wasn't a driver's side impact. It doesn't even bear thinking what would have happened if the circumstance would have happened that way. Yeah, again, a very tricky situation there, and it's unfortunate to see that, but thankful again that at least this race managed to finish without another accident of that form there at the end of this. So we'll see what's the situation at the same time there too. But Kyle Larson and Ryan Preece finishing 33rd and 34th there at the finish of this one too. So really, I guess more questions still to be revealed about the next gen car, not just how it races and the effect that it's had on super speedways. When we had the race last fall at Talladega, and we had two lines of single, two long lines of traffic, and nobody able to make runs, nobody able to run three wide, and anytime somebody tries, things just kind of went out of control. I kind of figured that was more a consequence of the concerns that everybody had about the car last year, particularly with significant, rear end impacts. And I thought the drivers were just running a bit more conservatively. I was surprised to kind of see a bit more of that in today's race for much of the green flag runs. And there were situations where a lot of drivers that were further back in the pack, they kind of just stayed where they were because there wasn't a way to get a run. There wasn't a way to work their way up there. I had kind of been under the impression that this was more of a conscious decision from the drivers, almost like in 2009 where there was the protests where the drivers weren't allowed to, really kind of race each other aggressively. It kind of ran single file for most of that race, and McMurray kind of ended up with the win. I was thinking that was what was happening, but clearly from this race, that's not the case. And much like Denny Hamlin was kind of predicting in his podcast this week, we're in a situation with these next gen cars where they just can't race each other. You can't get a big run and you can't be able to make that move. There was so much of this race where Michael McDowell, for example, running 2 laps down, was directly behind Chase Briscoe, who he needed to pass to get the lucky dog spot. And knowing that a caution could and would happen under any circumstance. And yet he just couldn't get around him. There was just no way to do it. And part of that was because the car actually was having a problem. The wheel was towed out to an extent, and that was creating a lot of drag, and that was something that the team was constantly chasing the entire race. But the other part of it was, you just couldn't. It's not like he could just slot into the outside lane and then kind of work his way around Briscoe and then get right back in front of him. And there was no third lane that he could really move there until it got to the end of the stages. And that was a very interesting part. When it did get to the end of the stages and a third lane did form, McDowell actually, from the onboard shot, he suddenly was just kind of rocketing through a lot of these cars, and so was Briscoe at that point. So he actually had a pretty good battle for the lucky dog spot during that, just in the last couple of laps of the stages. As much as I'm not a fan of stage racing and the stage cautions, it did at least encourage the field to kind of dice things up a little bit more in that sense there. And at that point, you could make these passes. So the potential is there. But is that prudent for these drivers to do? I mean, is it logical to expect that they're going to just run over each other this entire race for 500 miles and maybe have 2 cars left at the end? No, it isn't. But it is possible to still have, some good racing. What the way would be to balance all that out, I'm not sure. But that's another thing to kind of look That's kind of a different situation there. So, but that was interesting. I wasn't really expecting that from this because McDowell over the radio, he was trying to stay positive, but you could tell he was just frustrated. I mean, it was a situation where so many times he was by himself and then losing laps. We see this especially at the new races in Atlanta, where if you even have the slightest issue, like Bubba Wallace had when he spun into the inside wall, you're just toast. There's nobody else that you're going to be able to draft with and everything. And McDowell was able to have a situation where he was able to draft with his teammates at Front Row Motorsports. He had Zane Smith back there and Todd Gilliland. They were trying to make something happen, but even with them, until the last few laps of the stage, they couldn't really kind of negotiate their way through traffic. It was really more of a prevent defense, if you will, where they had to just kind of hang on to what they had and knowing that they had to just get, the best run that they could. So, yeah, kind of a difficult situation. I mean, that's always been a problem at Talladega in one way or the other. The fact that the race is so long and there really hasn't been much point in doing something really aggressively to begin with. I think the early 2000s aero package is probably the best that we've had, just because the closing rate was so quick and the packs would form up so easily that really you had no choice but to make like a bunch of crazy moves. Second to that would be the tandems, where really if you want, instead of having a massive pack, having all these tandem cars trying to kind of jockey for position and slingshot each other and get in these massive runs, you really had to link up with anybody out there to try to kind of keep up with that pack. But when you have this situation now where there's stuff in there that keeps the cars overheating, if they lock bumpers, where locking bumpers itself has been dissuaded, certainly more in the Xfinity and Truck Series, not so much in Cup, although in the Cup cars, it's kind of designed in such a way that you're kind of disincentivized from doing that as well. They don't line up nearly as well as, say, like the car tomorrow did, where they're just like a flat rear bumper and a flat front bumper, and it just kind of sticks like that. It's not conducive to having a really competitive race in the middle. But clearly, there should be some kind of solution where they're able to do something like that. If a driver is trying to get the lucky dog from a car directly in front of them, and they're in a draft where there's cars to your right and there's cars in front of that guy, and you can't do anything but just stay in that format, that's kind of a problem. Now, at the same time, how much of this is a new problem, and how much of this is something that's in one way or another been there? I remember in 2003, in the Daytona 500, the one that was rain shortened, you would have these impressive and just beautiful 3-wide packs. But Michael Waltrip would lead all of the first 20 laps because nobody could get a run on him. And, anybody that could be within the sight of the leader in one of those lines. And again, same problem. Can't go anywhere. Can't do anything. So it's something that NASCAR has been chasing for a long time. I don't know exactly what the solution is. I don't know if going unrestricted is the way to go, especially with some of the accidents we've been seeing, and now certainly some questions about the integrity of the roll cage in the next gen car. Those are things to certainly look at too. It's always been that dividing line between entertainment and safety, and that's nothing new. But I mean, that's something that needs to be looked at critically there too. But Noah Gragson ends up in the 32nd spot. Ty Gibbs running out of fuel at the end there. Again, the ongoing problem about these overtime restarts and these extremely lengthy cautions, whether warranted or not, at a track this big. You get these situations where fuel mileage throws, its wrench into it. You got drivers like Kevin Harvick having to make unscheduled stops and throwing a runaway there at the end there too. And then a driver like Ty Gibbs trying to make it and then having that too. Fuel mileage races, I think ordinarily are usually pretty exciting, and you have like a pretty crazy situation where things can work out. But then of course, when the race gets pushed so far past its scheduled distance, it raises a lot of the same problems we had back at COTA with the green, white, checkered rule, and whether the solution should be, freezing the field or not freezing the field, or just letting them race to the line. I think in this race here, even more so than the Bristol Dirt race, it was clear when they had that big wreck at the end, they weren't going to run to the line. I mean, it was just too far away. And that probably ultimately helped Kyle Busch pull off the victory, because if he had to stay at full throttle, he probably would have run out of gas. And maybe Ryan Blaney would have pulled off the win. arguably would have been more exciting. But given, I think after the Kyle Larson accident, I don't blame NASCAR for kind of pulling their punches on that. And having that situation. Another driver that was a big figure in this one here would be Bubba Wallace. Don't want to ignore the fantastic run he had for most of this race. Seemed to be having the one car that, yes, was extremely loose, but also seemed to be one of the only cars that really could make anything close to any kind of a move through the pack, whether it being a good pusher with another driver out there or getting out in front and kind of slotting in front of a line. We saw at one point Eric Jones forming up a third line and Bubba jumping in front of that, kind of making it his own and working his way up there. Ultimately, lap traffic kind of messed that strategy up there, but through no fault of his own. Bubba very close to pulling off his second win at Talladega. Don't blame him at all for being as frustrated as he was after that wreck. Saved the car once by throwing a extremely aggressive block in turn one, but couldn't save it twice after going up to the high lane there. Unfortunately, loses control involved in the incident there at the very end of the race. And ends up with finish well back in the order here, showing him 28th in the unofficial results there behind Martin Truex. But again, I think, and I was talking with Laspro about this last night, and trying to handicap the field here. One thing I think that's been a result of the current super speedway package at Talladega and Daytona is something much closer to way a track like Martinsville would be in the mid 2000s. We do have a group of maybe about 5 or 6 drivers that I think you could legitimately look at to be the ones that are actually stirring the pot. They're the ones that are actually going to be up there that can actually make some moves and battle for the win among themselves. I mean, they could almost have the race to themselves, if not for the fact that the form of racing that we have right now still has entire links of traffic that are slotted up behind everybody else. And that's just going to be the situation here. I think that Bubba Wallace is certainly in that group. I would include him. I would say Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney, and gosh, I mean, that's 4 right there. Beyond that, it's really hard to say. I know when we talked about, this going into the race, Brad Keselowski would be a 5th one as well. Denny Hamlin had a similar discussion to this too, but I would say, Bubba and Hamlin and Blaney and Logano and Keselowski, those are the 5 that it seems like generally you're going to have to beat if you're going to be a factor to win this race, which is very unusual because ultimately sequences played out the way they did, that ultimately none of them were a factor from one reason or another. Logano getting in his spin, either running out of gas for the drivers. You have other drivers that you would expect to be up there, but actually had long streaks of not winning at Talladega in particular. Kyle Busch, I would have never thought of picking for this win because, again, like they mentioned in the broadcast, it's been 15 years since he won a Talladega race. Now, obviously, he's since made the move over to Richard Childress, which has a much better super speedway program, it seems, even than Joe Gibbs Racing. Certainly being able to latch onto a larger pool of Chevrolets versus the few Toyotas out there trying to fight themselves against the world there. I think that certainly helps. But I wasn't thinking of picking Kyle Busch for this. I wouldn't have thought of picking Kevin Harvick for this for the same reason. Hadn't won at Talladega since 2010. Ultimately didn't win in this one too. Has one more shot at it this fall as part of his Forever Tour. But yeah, we got a stream lag. That's not good. Oh goodness, we got that problem on the top of everything else. Okay, I do apologize if we're having issues here. Let's see. Is it still lagging, folks? Goodness, this thing is falling apart. I have no idea what on earth is going on here today. We've got static on the audio. We're like Kyle Busch here coming to the finish of this race. We're just like everything is pieces coming off and fuel running out. And we got 500 feet to go, and we still got to get to the line, and there you go. Okay, all good on your end? Okay, good. Again, I apologize, folks. We got 92 people in here. I do apologize. It usually doesn't sound like this. It usually doesn't look like this. I'm going to have to just tear things down and start over here for our show in Dover next week. But we'll make do with the best we can here. If you have to make this as a podcast for our viewers here watching this a little bit later on, not watching it live, hopefully that'll be something that can still check out here in the meantime. But yeah, surprising win for Kyle Busch. Again, just kind of a sloppy sloppy situation there, but yeah, we'll see how things go. I'll catch up on these super chats too. Thank you so much for dropping in here on that too. We'll catch up on that at the same time. But I got to say, I'm happy for a lot of the other surprising runs a bit further back in the pack here. We went over the top 10 earlier. Undoubtedly, this is probably still going to change before we get the official results. But looking at it here again, Eric Jones in the 6th spot. Great to see. I mean, he's always seems to be up there. Again, I wouldn't quite put him in that top 5 of guys that, are always ones you're going to have to beat. But I think he's probably the best of the rest that are always going to be up there and trying to contend for wins to try to take away from those 5 guys. He's been in position to actually win this race a couple times these last couple of years and has had one thing or another happen at the end, whether he was driving for Gibbs or the Petties or anybody else in between. But having a good run, and good to see that Thunderbird scheme get a good run after they had so many struggles running it back at Richmond a couple weeks ago. And then looking further back, Todd Gilliland had that great run at the fall race here last year. I thought about picking him for this one, but I was kind of had my misgivings about it since he was running the 36 instead of the 38. I wasn't sure if he was going to have the same crew or anything on hand. I guess he did, but that's still something to look at. And then again, yeah, JJ Yaley for the 11th place run, huge rebound for him after that. Really, I mean, he had such a frustrating day at Martinsville last week. And apparently, again, we heard after our show last week, him saying that he was at 75% stuck throttle going into turn 3 there when he hit the outside wall and ended up in that accident. Really frustrating situation, but glad he got out of that okay. And after recovering from both that and the run at Richmond, where he was very nearly in last place, good to see him get an 11th place run. And certainly the team needed that too, after everything that's gone on here this last week as well. Tyler Reddick, very impressed with him coming back to finish 13th after I thought he was going to be easily, when he bounced off that wall in the entrance to pit road right at that curve before the pit road starts, I thought for sure I was going to be writing an article. I was already kind of thinking about it in my head. It's like, oh, okay, he finished last in this race last year. We'll talk about a thing where he's now with this different team and we'll do this and da-da-da. And then he ends up getting back out there and he's still on the lead lap, or he was a lap down and then gets a lap back. Just a tremendous way to kind of bounce back in there in the field. So a lot of drivers deserve an attaboy for getting back up there. But a lot of heartbreak along the way, too. Lastboro picked Joey Logano to win, and I picked Justin Haley. I was pleased with Haley for a lot of this. I thought he was really going to get a good run. He was pretty much in stage 2 when, again, nobody could really kind of get away from each other. He still held on to about the 3rd or 4th spot and seemed like he was going to have a good showing. Unfortunately ends up back at the 18th spot, which is actually probably the best he'd run the entire day. Other than stage 2. I mean, basically really the best he'd run in stage 3, rather. Not the whole day, of course. When he was 3rd and 4th, it was the best he'd run all day. But in stage 3, it seemed like he was at the tail end of the field, just kind of lagging back and I guess waiting for something to happen. And then when it ultimately did, he was able to at least capitalize it on and get a top 20 finish out of it. But as mentioned by the Fox broadcast there, still looking for his first super speedway win since that lightning round at Daytona a couple of years ago when he was driving for Spire Motorsports there. So a different thing to look at there at the same time. We will talk about the Xfinity Series race as well. First things first, I definitely have to give a shout out over to Blaine Perkins. Hope that he's feeling better. Again, appreciated the updates both from the family this morning that he's still awake and alert in the hospital, and then later from Mike Joy during the race reporting that Blaine is still in the hospital for the rest of today and may well be in the hospital again tomorrow for further evaluations. We don't know what the nature of those evaluations are, what they're looking at. I don't want to speculate. But again, him being awake and alert, we saw him getting out of the car, are positive indicators. Hopefully we'll hear more through this week here and find out what's going on. Easily, I would say, even more than Daniel Hemrick's wreck later in that Xfinity race, the most shocking accident there. Wheels and parts coming off that car, the number 02 for Our Motorsports, down the back straightaway there. One of the wheels was struck by Kaz Gralla there on the apron. Gralla able to come back and actually was among the leaders there before he ended up involved in an accident there as well. And then Dexter Stacy, and what was a big all or nothing weekend for Motorsports Business Management. They put a lot of effort into both their cars. Jason White misses the show, sent home with a couple of the other cars, including Mike Harmon trying to get back in there in the 74, and Jesse Iwuji trying to make the 34 car get back in the show there. Unfortunately, they missed the cut, and then Stacy ends up with a very hard hit at the end of the pit wall, or the end of the backstretch wall, where it sticks out there, where the cars, the equipment trucks coming in and out of the infield there. Very hard hit, although according to Stacy from his post-race interview, it looked a lot worse than it turned out to be, at least from how he experienced it. And ultimately, Stacy wasn't sent to a local hospital the way Perkins was. So hopefully we'll get some more information on that coming up here. Between the two races, I got to say, I was very... it's unfortunate the wrecks happened the way they did, but I thought the Xfinity race was very exciting. Some very competitive racing. And again, I'm not talking about the wrecks in this sense. I mean the racing actually in between, whether it was for the stages or just in the middle of it there. I thought we were heading to have a really dramatic finish. It was unfortunate that we had so many big accidents at the end, much like in the Sunday race here. Certainly the Junior Motorsports wreck, where once again Sam Mayer and Justin Allgaier and Josh Berry just can't seem to work together and get any kind of a decent run out of it. They ended up dropping back in that situation. And a very hard hit for Mayer in particular. His splitter gets ripped off and ends up in the front grille of Gray Galding's car further back in the lineup there. And then the even bigger accident, the one that involved with Daniel Hemrick, just coming down. And now you want to talk about an incident that's much more glaring. I know people are going to be critical about Noah Gragson coming down on Chastain and when he was forcing that 3-wide move there into turn one. I think it would be much more right to be critical of Daniel Hemrick, who did accept blame and responsibility for that accident in the post-race interview. I don't want to make it seem like he didn't, but I think that was a much more boneheaded move, even at the end of the race there, to come down and literally hook yourself right off the first car on the inside lane and just destroy a ton of equipment out there. Hemrick himself very hard into the outside wall, upside down, took out a robo-cam in the corner. Ryan Sieg's run, where he was looking like he was going to finally break through and get his first win, was still running about third or fourth when that wreck happened, couldn't get around it, and ends up collected in that big pile up there. Ultimately completely changes the outcome of that race there. Although Jeb Burton, has to be said, even before that accident, clearly had one of the best cars out there, was making some tremendous moves for the Jordan Anderson effort out there, and along with his teammate Parker Retzlaff, who came back from the incident that actually determined the last place finisher, Parker Chase taking last place in the Xfinity Series race there. Jeb Burton had one of the best cars in that race easily, and it was not disappointing at all for him to be able to pull off this victory, even under the circumstances with all these wrecks and everything else that was happening at the finish of it there. So kudos to Jeb Burton, and particularly to Jordan Anderson and the Jordan Anderson Racing team, returning to the track where Anderson had suffered those serious burns getting out of that truck there, the Truck Series race last fall. Was sprayed with hot oil when he was trying to get out of the truck there, and a very harrowing situation. Kudos to Fox Sports 1 for actually doing a follow-up interview with him on that. I thought that was well done, but also kind of discussing him and that team and actually getting a good performance out there and getting their first win. Anderson is one of the most passionate team owners in that sport, and really trying to get the best performance that he could out there. I think he's got a great thing going there with Retzlaff and Jeb Burton. Jeb was really having just such a miserable season last year in that extra entry for Our Motorsports. Things just weren't happening out there. To see him now punch his ticket and do it under the green flag there, unlike the last time he won at Talladega and it was a rain shortened race. I'm sure that's validating for him. But getting that victory there, huge for them. Parker Retzlaff coming back to finish in the top 10 after the wreck on the back straightaway. So a great effort for the Jordan Anderson team in general. And they really showed a lot of spunk out there to get the best performance that they could do between those two entries out there. Sheldon Creed, your second place finisher here. Looking further back in the lineup here, Parker Kligerman in third. Looked like Kligerman and Creed were going to work on something to kind of get up there up front. Unfortunately, that deal fell through pretty quickly, but Creed still your runner-up finisher, still looking for his first Xfinity win, as is Kligerman. Brennan Poole coming back to the side of a race that he should have been the winner of in 2016, getting his first top five since I believe 2017 at the end of his tenure with Chip Ganassi Racing. Poole getting a fifth place finish, was almost joined by his JD Motorsports teammate Garrett Smithley, who was right with him. It looked like they were going to have a drafting line there that was going to be able to work their way up and get a good finish out of it. Unfortunately, Smithley gets caught up in another ridiculous incident that was not his fault. Just gets caught up in it and spun out coming to the line there and ends up dropping back to the 16th place finish back there. Kyle Sieg, after his brother was eliminated in that big wreck with Daniel Hemrick, also looked like he was going to get a good run. Ultimately was shook out of the draft, stuck in the middle lane at the end there. He plummets back to the 15th spot, which is still one of Kyle's best runs out there. So good to see out of that. CJ McLaughlin, I believe, tied his second best finish there, finishing in the 13th place spot there. Ryan Ellis nearly in the top 10 for the first time in his Xfinity career with a Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers car, an effort that came about just from that social media post that he did in March, looking for sponsorship for his effort, and certainly had a beautiful paint scheme and a good run out there. He and his Alpha Prime teammate, or one of them rather, Cesar Baccarella, working their way towards the front. And Baccarella, who was in last place for a lot of the opening stages of that race, still ends up getting a sixth place finish in that one too. Gray Galding, mentioned him after picking up the debris off Sam Mayer's car, finishing in the 8th spot there, finally returning to form as he had so many good runs on the super speedways with Bobby Daughter's team. Yes, some attrition had to happen to kind of lead to this, but ultimately still a great performance out of him to get that 8th place run. And Joey Gase right behind him as well, the 9th place finish, his first top 10 since he left Jimmy Means' team a few years ago. And another great run for the Emmerling Gase effort. That has itself been going through a lot of last car articles or last car features earlier this year. This was a race that we still saw some underdogs kind of survive a lot of the attrition that happened in this race. But your last place finisher was Parker Chase, his first of his Xfinity Series career. The DVP, his clock expired during a caution there very early in the race. Him getting hooked along with Anthony Alfredo and Parker Retzlaff at the same time. Alfredo, feel terrible for him. He had a fantastic car out there, led 5 laps in the first stage, seemed to have just a great car out there if he could just keep his nose clean, and ends up just collected in a wreck that just wasn't his fault. Derek Kraus made a bit of contact there on the inside and triggered that wreck. I hate to see it because the 78 team in general, with whatever their arrangement is to kind of improve that team's performance at the BJ McLeod effort there, we saw his spirited charge at Phoenix earlier this year from a penalty that allowed him to kind of claw back up there. Some other good runs that he's had at Daytona and so forth. But he looked like he was going to be on his way to another good run there in 6th on the grid, but finishing next to last there. Jade Buford as well in the second big machine racing effort. Could have had as good a run as his teammate Parker Kligerman did at the finish of this, but ends up in the 36th spot there. Dexter Stacy and again Blaine Perkins rounding out your bottom 5 finishers in the Xfinity Series race. But I will say, yeah, I mean, the Xfinity race had pretty much everything that you would see in a Talladega race, but again, a very harrowing situation there with what happened with Blaine Perkins and Dexter Stacy's accident, and then later on with the situation there for the 11 team with Daniel Hemrick. It was a lot more carnage than I would have rather it had, because unfortunately I think that in the highlight videos it's certainly going to distract from a lot of very competitive racing. I think that the Xfinity package continues to put on, including at the super speedways, but we'll see what happens on that end there too. But again, your last place finisher, Parker Chase, already featured in the article here posted there today. David Starr was the other DNQ from the Xfinity race there, trying to get back in the field in the other SS Greenlight effort. but failing to make the show. I think that's another thing that kind of points to how good of a run Galding had here, that he basically had to kind of do it on his own and just draft with whoever he could pick up on there. So a fine showing for him and the 08 team out there in the effort. So kind of the tale of two races here. Yeah, great Xfinity racing out there, but a Cup race that was a bit hot and cold, I would have to say. It's unfortunate that it ended up being just as much of a crash fest as we saw in the Daytona 500 at the end. I think overall we had better racing in the Daytona 500 this year versus this Talladega race. I don't think there was as much of a sense that you couldn't go anywhere, which is pretty surprising given the fact that Talladega, of course, has a much wider surface, much more forgiving transitions into the corners. But you wouldn't know it from this race. I think at Daytona, people were able to make a lot of moves and, had a pretty compelling race for most of that distance, which was unfortunately spoiled by a lot of the cautions at the end. Certainly the cautions had a similar spoiling effect to this one, and then the fuel mileage on top of it that was kind of thrown in there. It's unfortunate that things kind of played out that way. But again, it's a matter of survival sometimes. As to what the proper solution is going to be, I don't know. I guess, and I've seen it some of the comments here in the chat here too. It's got to be a situation where maybe running the Xfinity cars is the proper solution. Maybe putting those cars with more experienced hands with these Cup Series regulars could put on a good race. I don't know. But I think realistically, I don't see them dropping these cars back to the Xfinity Series and having those guys deal with them. I don't see that happening. So, I don't know. I think that's going to be another thing to kind of look at the same time. Let me catch up on these super chats here at the same time. Thank you so much again, everybody, for tuning in. Again, I do apologize for the audio issues here, and hopefully we'll have that cleared up here for future episodes here. But going back to Michael Jensen's comment here, while listening to the MRN broadcast, they mentioned Eli Gold finished his cancer treatments on Friday, as we share in our aficionado of announcing, but you have a platform. I thought it was appropriate to share with you. Yes, absolutely. And I did retweet the post that show him ringing the bell at the cancer center. Yes, very happy to hear Eli Gold famously, not only from the Alabama broadcast there in college football, but in motorsports as well, being the voice of TNN for that decade that they covered the sport there, and of course even more so in radio broadcasting before that and after that. One of just an absolutely iconic voice in the sport. Great to hear him recovering there. That's fantastic news. And glad that was shared out there to see that that's the case. And so definitely yes, you're very right to bring that up, Michael, and definitely has to be mentioned, especially as how often we talk about broadcasting in this. I'm not sure if Eli Gold would have approved of having a Put It Out segment there at the beginning of this, where they feature right when they're talking to Chase Elliott coming back from an injury of his own. Yes, an off-track injury. But showing Rusty Wallace fracture his wrist in 1993, which had a direct effect on his full season championship effort against Dale Earnhardt, even when he was winning 10 races that season. Or later on, having another montage that slipped in Dale Earnhardt's accident in 1996 that was ultimately, the most serious of his career, arguably, that he walked away from, and ultimately sent, really kind of ruined his 96 season, and ultimately wasn't really kind of fully back into it again until about 1999 or so, even after the Daytona 500 win in 98. It was a bit tasteless, and that was unfortunate. It's unfortunate to see. And it's especially, I think, for any casual viewer, it must have been really jarring to see all these clips of like big wrecks and crazy stuff that's happened in the past, and then have the race run as clean as it was for most of it. You have like a one-car spin, and then a lot of just kind of, waiting for something to happen. And, and I'm not crazy about that sense of waiting for it or portraying a lot of this green flag racing is boring. I mean, certainly for the drivers, it was frustrating to not be able to move places, and that's certainly something to look at with just the racecraft and the way these cars are able to kind of handle things. But I think that, as a viewer, for a viewing experience, and the way these broadcasters handle it, it should be like air traffic control. It's like, you're just kind of waiting for it and you're looking for like smaller things. I liked one way that I liked from the broadcast today is that Clint Boyer and Tony Stewart even were kind of noticing little things that were causing the accidents, like when something did happen. It was unfortunate that we didn't see as much of it during the green flag runs, but when an incident did happen, like talking about the tunnel in turn 3 and how it upset the situation there for Harrison Burton going through turns 3 and 4 and caused his car to break loose. That was a nice little detail. I mean, that I think nobody would have noticed. I certainly didn't notice it. So I appreciated little things like that being brought to detail. And again, much like with all this attention on Chase Elliott, it just shows that they can do it. It's just they need to have the direction there to be able to be doing these things, to really bring out these little details. And when you have long green flag runs, you should be kind of listening for other things that are happening. They didn't even really catch what was happening with McDowell when, he lost a lap. One of those first laps that he was losing there about 2/3 the way through the race, but actually he took a wave around and was about to get the lucky dog spot back from Briscoe and just had to short pick because he was on a different sequence there after that first incident, and it kind of screwed up his rhythm from there. It would have been interesting to kind of see that treated a little bit differently. Ultimately, the parachute did kind of come out for McDowell and he ended up losing those extra laps, but that would be another one to kind of look at too. Let's see here. Oh, do we already have a call there on the inspection? Larson's car is being taken to R&D. Excellent, Nick Brown. That's good to know. I had not seen that report there, and that would be certainly good to see too. Careful, the melon heads will get you. I'm getting the comment on that. Yeah. Well, look, again, I think at very most, I'll concede it's maybe a 50-50. 60-40, but I think it's silly to say that that's entirely on Gragson. I mean, you're a kid out there in your first Cup season, and he's again, there's a lot going on behind the scenes there. Whether it's what's going on with that team or this massive marketing push with Wendy's and him staying out, I'm sure, all night, partying with the folks on Talladega Avenue. But still, the kid's going for it, and I think he just had a couple of people that were, just going for it. So I think that was kind of the situation. Where am I looking at this? Okay, hang on. Still looking for this and getting some other comments on this. Yeah, thank you. Charles H. here on Twitter. Shout out to him. Yeah, you got to be kidding. Ross forcing a 3-wide where there was no 3-wide. Exactly. So, I mean, come on. I mean, I know it's easy. It's easy to just, I know that they've sold plenty of T-shirts with the whole "Thanks, Ross" meme. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can blame him for this or blame him for that. But, I've seen Ernie Irvan make plenty of moves like that, and he got plenty of blame for those. So, I don't think the passage of time changes any of that. I don't see anything else on this. Yeah, Larson out of the care center. Okay. Look at the results here again. Okay, it still lists as accident for Austin Dillon out, not the DVP. That was another thing I was wondering, because that ultimately came up in the situation there with Parker Chase yesterday. That ultimately his clock expired. It looked like that was going to be the situation for Dillon, because I was watching his onboard there when he was on pit road, and it looked like he was losing. They were kind of keeping an eye on the clock and waiting, seeing if it was going to wind down there. But I guess in this, at least in the results, I don't know how much latitude they give themselves to consider a driver out under the DVP versus a wreck. I guess if they call it early or something, maybe that's the situation. But I'd love to get some clarification on that too. But let's see here. But that's about most of the notes I have on the Cup and Xfinity races. Oh, I still have some super chats to catch up on. Let me make sure I get those too. Just get a little more beverage here in the meantime. Again, kudos to Junior Motorsports for sending the sun drops out here to the West Coast. I was when they had that offer. I'm glad they set that up there, because again, that's pretty For some reason, they say that it's a Target out here on the West Coast, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So I'm glad that they had that out here. So that is the beverage for tonight's show here at the same time. Let's see. Oh, yes. Let me get the rest of the super chats here. So again, thank you, Michael, for your other mention on Eli Gold there earlier. Nicholas Gray, I understand the sheet metal coming apart, but with the bar is bent like the 5, doesn't that raise red flags? The bar is supposed to be the strongest part. Exactly. Yeah, I absolutely agree, Nicholas. I mean, again, and it goes back to discussing, even in J.D. McDuffie's accident in Watkins Glen in 91, which was a fatal accident, but it was not because of the failure in the frame of the car. And this is 1991. This was why there were so many misconceptions about his accident is, that something went in the car, something punctured the roof. But one thing that didn't happen was the actual frame of the car. And this was a Richard Childress car. This was a former Dale Earnhardt car, according to the reports that I heard when I was putting together the JD book, that when he hit the outside wall, even as violent as that accident was, that frame rail didn't bend. It stayed in that one shape. And to the point where even like the body of the car wraps around that frame and you can see the outline of it. As vicious of an accident that was, versus what we saw in, say, again, like Bobby Allison's accident in 88, where it was just so much more of a devastating accident, and perhaps those frame rails weren't really designed quite as strong as they would be, just even a couple of years later. To the point where the investigators that were sitting in JD's car during the investigation afterwards, the person that was taller than JD could still sit in the seat behind the wheel. Because the entire structure of the car held up that way. Certainly a T-bone accident is the worst possible scenario in any of these. You think about not just Bobby Allison's accident, you think of more recent examples, such as that Bristol, that Bristol race with the late models there, and they had the veteran drivers, and Larry Pearson being involved in one. That was a very scary incident. You think about the accidents that they had in the Mexico Series, where we lost, I believe it was Carlos Pardo, that was in that incident there, where a car broadsided a barrier and the frame just didn't hold up. And it was just too much for the burden to bear. And tragically, we lost the driver in that accident. Very thankful that we didn't have a situation like that here. But that's got to be a concern. And that could be a danger anywhere, not just at a track like Talladega. That could be a problem at a place like Dover that we go to next week, or a place like Darlington that we're coming up in a couple weeks, or any place else. That's got to be strong. And again, I'd love to hear an explanation. I don't know if we're going to. Because it always seems like we discover this information just on race day, which I still don't think is the best way to do it, because, it's just absurd. But I never would have thought that an incident like this, even though, Priest had gassed it up again, but was that any stronger than, an incident from further back? I don't know. That would be another one to kind of look at, too. But it's certainly troubling, and I'm seeing the comment here about the Larson to R&D, but hopefully that they should. I don't know if they will, but if that I saw that was posted in here earlier, but hopefully that's true, because that would be interesting to see. No tires, just gas. You're gonna be at Dover, yeah, right on. Yeah, if you get some last place pictures, definitely let me know. We'll check that out too. And Bowser Jr. XD, thank you for both your super chats as well. First of all, saying Dega had its best attendance since 2008. It definitely looked like a very lively crowd. I think Talladega always does. But at least from watching it on TV, I think it was good to see, the stands looked as full as they'd ever had, at least in the last few years. A lot of excitement about this, and that's good to see. Anything that's bringing more people out there, that's what you want to see. I don't know what we're going to see in the ratings. Again, like I said in last week's show, I don't really glue myself to that. I think that's not the only measure that we should be looking at. But clearly, NASCAR is going to be concerned about that, and they're going to look at, I'm sure they're going to do another Chase Elliott's back thing next week at Dover, and kind of figure things out from there. But it looked like a very lively crowd. I love the sponsor activation that Wendy's did. Like I said, the Wendy's isn't sponsoring this. I don't want to make it sound like I feel like I've talked too much about that between that sponsorship and Gregson's run and everything. But Gregson was a big part of what was happening there. And also, I manually counted the seats, and it was around 90%. Yeah, again, very surprising and good to see. And again, hopefully an indication of where things are going forward from here. So that'll be another thing to look at the same time. Kind of browsing through the comments here at the same time. Trying to kind of fill the air at the same time, so hopefully we don't have too much of the fuzz over the audio. I do, again, apologize for situation on that. We'll get that straightened out here, hopefully, for our next week's show here. But, yeah. Well, yeah, certainly the 1 o'clock hit, Isaac McCabe. That's certainly the most dangerous, for a driver in striking a wall for sure. But I think, definitely a T-bone incident there too. I mean, is very dangerous. I mean, that's why you have drivers that are trying to avoid hitting the door as best they can. I mean, you think about Larry Gunselman's incident that he had with Dario Franchitti, at Talladega in 2008. And actually, I talked with Larry for his upcoming Field Fillers episode, and he actually discussed that. That'll be something that'll be coming up in a later project there too. But yeah, very serious incident. Franchitti was ultimately injured in that one too. But there was other stuff that was going on there at the same time. And again, Gunselman's side of the story, that's another thing I'll be kind of working on in the future here too. But I got to say, other things that are happening from this past weekend. Yeah, good to see the crowd out there. Good to see a lot of excitement out there. It's definitely a race that I'd love to cover in person one of these days. That's not the plan this year. We're going to do Sears Point coming up in June, and then we're looking at Talladega in the fall. Gosh, that would be crazy. No, Phoenix in the fall for the championship. The air conditioning's off in here, and I feel a little loopy. I think that's probably what's going on. So I do apologize on that. Let's see. What's the next place to go? We're going to do some trivia here in a little bit. I got a little bit of housekeeping I want to kind of bring up here on the show. If you guys have any of your questions from either the Saturday race or today's race that you definitely want to ask me about, definitely let me know. And oh goodness, thank you so much, Beast of Metal. God goodness, you don't have to do that, but thank you so much for the super chat. I find it odd that one of the most common results of T-Bone Rex and Gen 6 was rollovers, but then when a major T-Bone happens in the next gen, it basically breaks a roll cage. I can't help but wonder about the difference. Yes, very good point. Yeah, I mean, if you have a wreck that plays out one way because you have the body being as strong as it should be to absorb that impact, or maybe deflect the car off of another one, and then you had a situation here where it just deforms the shape of what should be a really strong part of the car. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It should be looked at more critically. So hopefully that'll get worked out. But yes, thank you so much for the super chat there as well. So I do want to, again, kind of do a little bit of housekeeping here at the same time. I saw some questions here about what I'll be doing on the videos coming up here. This has actually been a pretty productive weekend. I've been kind of working on getting the scripts for the next couple episodes of 500 Days. And that is going to be the current priority at the moment. I believe I already mentioned this in the Patreon, so we'll have that information out there. But 500 Days is kind of where my current focus is. And I have 2 episodes I'm working on at the same time, which will be on the 3rd race of the 2001 season at Las Vegas and the 4th race at Atlanta. And there's a very good reason for that, of course, with what's coming up with North Wilkesboro and a lot of the talk about the 29 car and Kevin Harvick's run there. So that's kind of the goal right now, is to try to kind of work on those and get those done. So I've been getting the research there. That phase of that is done. Brian Hallman's been providing some fantastic pictures. I've actually got another interview that I'm trying to set up here to kind of work on tying one aspect of that story together. And then, yes, I hope to get started recording on that in the next week or so, and then be able to just kind of get that together and hopefully have those done about mid-May. That's kind of what I'm aiming for. So we'll see how that's going to play out. Hopefully it doesn't take too much longer. I don't know how long the videos are going to be, because this is going to be kind of a departure from those first 4, where it's so much more on, Dale Earnhardt, of course, and for obvious reasons. but also these other races. It's still going to be following a lot of the storylines from those first 4 episodes, but also kind of building on them with what happens in each race and how the season progresses. And I think these 2 are definitely going to be, I mean, obviously for those of you who remember what happened in those races, they really are critical moments there in setting up what happens later in that season and what happened in those drivers' careers as well. So those will be things to kind of talk about. Yeah, so those are gonna be the big videos I'm gonna be working on here. I've kind of put other projects kind of aside at the moment, at least until those are done. I do have another standalone driver profile video that's in the works. So that one's going to be kind of coming together. And again, field fillers is going to be after that. So we're going to we got a lot of stuff that I'm working on. Big thanks to those of you in the Patreon and those of you following stuff on this channel and sharing the videos out there, because that's been tremendously helpful. It really helps putting these videos together. It also helps pay for our staff writers over at lastcar.info because they're going to be doing some more coverage this year, and kind of getting them set up there. Yeah, a lot of stuff that we're working on here, and hopefully that your guys are looking forward to that as well. So that's kind of what I'm working on here behind the scenes. Another thing, mentioning the Patreon as well. I also, those of you, and I mentioned this here in the Patreon already, I made some special postcards after the Fontana race this year with pieces of the wrap that I saved from BJ McLeod's car, the wrap that I had on the show here, in fact. A couple months ago, where we were kind of pulling it apart and seeing what parts of the decal were in there. That is that's something I've now worked with here, where we had the big piece that I showed you back here. I think you can still see it. Yeah, just a little bit over my shoulder here, that had the driver's name and the door decal. That one's staying here at Last Car headquarters. But I've now started a pair of auctions for the other big pieces of the decal, which are part of the roof number as well as the door sponsor decal. I started the auction off very low on that. If anybody's interested in those, I have them already boxed up and ready to go. So those auctions started on Saturday. They'll conclude this coming Saturday. The link to my eBay page is on a sticky post on my Twitter at Last Car on Brock, if you're interested in that. And also the postcards that I gave out to members of my Patreon. I have some extra ones that I've produced, just a limited number of them. Those are also available on eBay. Those are a buy it now ones. I'm selling those for $10 a piece with free shipping. So if you're interested in one of those, or maybe if you're not in the Patreon, if you're in the Patreon and you haven't received your card yet, if you haven't received it by May 1st, definitely let me know. I do have some extra ones on hand that I can send out, so we can definitely make sure in case somebody's got lost in the mail or whatever happened out there. I had a couple that got kicked back, so I had to resend those, but those should be out very soon. But if you haven't received yours and you're a Patreon member at any level, including our international members, definitely let me know if you haven't received yours by May 1st, and we'll get that out there. But if you're not interested in joining the Patreon and you just want the cards, I am selling a limited number of those on the eBay page as well, and again with free shipping on that. So again, if you're interested in the Patreon, that's one thing, and if you're interested in those cards, I have those there as well. So if you forgive the plug on that, that'll be available on there too. It was a lot of fun to put together. It took a bit of time to do, but it was a lot of fun just trying to kind of put like a good sized piece. And no two of them are the same because they're all cut off of pieces that were saved from that Fontana weekend. So we got like the track grime or the pitting in them from what was pretty, the sandblasting of that surface there was interesting to see. And the cards themselves actually have a couple pictures that I took from that weekend. So a print from that there as well. So it's kind of a unique piece. I want to make sure as many people had a chance to have something from that, because I thought, especially with the last race there at that track, that'd be a fun thing to do. So we had that there at the same time. So a lot of things going on here. Kind of behind the scenes at the same time. So we'll have, we got a lot of things in the works here, and we'll keep going with that too. Do we have any official call on inspection yet feel like I missed some other topics here from the race, but you can definitely mention. Oh yes, Isaac McKissick, thank you for retweeting this or liking it there. Loved seeing Dale Jr. wearing the official JD McDuffie shirt the McDuffie family put out there with the Monte Carlo version of the car out there. That was really cool to see. I mean, kind of have a little bit of fun in the broadcast there and talking about, the famous story of, Dale's father racing against his grandfather. Kind of a little fun. I like that they're doing some of that history with the animation and kind of tying that together. I mean, I know that a lot of people respond really well to that. I think that does a better job. Actually, this kind of does bring up a topic. Versus kind of the Hendrick Motorsports thing that was posted last week. I know I commented on that when they did this really over the top thing about Jeff Bodine's win in 1984 at Martinsville that did save Hendrick Motorsports. I thought that could have been done way better with just the footage from the race and maybe a narrator over it and tie in some pictures and some original footage and do that. I thought it was the fact that it had so little footage and had to reenact things from that. I saw what they were going for, and it's definitely a moment that needs to be brought up, but I think it wasn't the most effective way of conveying it. It was a little too over the top and a little cringy. I hate to use that term, but it kind of was. I would have rather just show it. Just show it. I mean, if you need to get access to the footage, I mean, you guys are the broadcasters for the sport. I'm sure they could be able to do something to kind of tie all that together. So that'll be one thing to look for at the same time. So yeah, why is everybody saying no? Uh-oh, did something else happen? But yeah. Yes, Alex the Admiral, thank you for your support there as well there too. Oh, you'll be wearing the NASCAR shirt at the track, the No Tires. Thank you so much. I appreciate you flying the colors. Anybody else is interested in NASCAR shirts, I do have an online store for that as well. That's, again, available on the NASCAR.info page. I believe Redbubble is still the company that produced the shirts through, so we have that available. But, yeah, I thought that... I thought that segment that they did with Hendrick Motorsports, it was well-meaning. I thought they were on the right path, but I think that, something with archival footage and pictures and narrations would have been way better. I mean, if you're not going to do it like the Dale Earnhardt, the Dale Jr. thing where you got an animation and it almost kind of the Dale Jr. thing kind of reminded me of the old Route 66 commercials that Darrell Waltrip did before he retired. And he'd tell these like tall tales about, like, oh, it's another Darrell Waltrip story. And then they'd have this thing about they tie it into, buying jeans at Kmart. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you Google it, if you look up on YouTube, I'm sure there's plenty of those ads on YouTube, but kind of gave that kind of feel, which is fine. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with having a little bit of fun and in creating and producing these historical retrospectives. I just think that there's some ways that are more effective to reach the goal that they're trying to do, which is whether it's to inform people or to get people excited about something. I think there's better ways to accomplish that. That one was fine. The Hendrick one was fine, but all the people that were involved in it were already so larger than life, like Jeff Bodine or Rick Hendrick or Harry Hyde even. The original people are way better than any actor you're going to be able to put in that. So I don't know, but that's kind of where I am with that. Let's see. Oh, the no's are for word on inspection. Okay, thank you. Let's see here. We'll keep Pockrus's page up here. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no call on the inspection here. Oh, Blaine Perkins was discharged from the hospital today. This being posted by Pockrus 3 minutes ago. That's fantastic news. Good to hear for that. So hopefully Perkins, I guess we'll hear more later in the week about exactly what he was treated for and what his plans are for the next Xfinity race. So we'll see what happens at Dover and beyond. It's a shame. He had a solid run going at Martinsville last week, and really had a rough start to the season with SS Greenlight. You hate to see it happen to any driver, but certainly for somebody trying to work their way through, it's definitely another one to certainly look at the same time. Let's see here. Yeah, I think we kind of covered those there at the same time. We'll go ahead and jump into a trivia section here on the show. If you guys have any other questions from the race weekend, we'll definitely cover those there as well. I'll try to kind of keep an eye out there at the same time, but that would be another one to look at. So again, we're bringing out the late 90s trivia deal. We'll do a couple questions here to wrap up the show here this evening. So again, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. So once again, those categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. You know, Eric, Isaac, you raise a good point. I should just do a poll. That would make more sense, wouldn't it? Can I do that? I'm using Streamlabs, so I don't know. I think you could do a poll in YouTube, but I don't know if I could do a poll in Streamlabs. That would be kind of the issue. Okay, no, I don't need that. Hang on. Let me close that. Alrighty. Hopefully we're still going. Okay, good. We're still live. I'll make sure I'm closing the right window here. Yeah, I think that would make a lot more sense. View it in a web browser. Can I do that from the web browser? Maybe I could do it that way. Let's see. Let me mute this so it's not, get a layering of the audio here. Oh, yeah, here we go, maybe. Engage. What does this do? Here we go. Can I do this? Let's see if this works, folks. Add option. Drivers. This. Teams. NASCAR. It doesn't let me put all the categories. I only can do 4 categories. So we got 3 for teams already. Okay, I guess we're already pretty close to this. Let's see. Well, here, we'll go ahead and do this just to see if it works. There we go. I can see it here. Can I see it here? Okay, there we go. I guess we could do that. This would probably be better if I had something for show and tell. I really don't at the same time there. I guess I could talk about this shirt here, but I mean, this is a reprint there of the Bobby Allison design there from his 1988 Daytona 500 victory. Definitely wanted to bring it out for the Alabama gang. I didn't know, I forgot that they were going to have Bobby, Donnie, and Red Farmer out there for the opening ceremonies. That was pretty cool. It was good to see there at the same time, and so you got to have them out there. And I like the little lead-in that Red Farmer had there to welcome everybody to their track. So that was pretty cool. But definitely got to say, yeah, one of the best paint schemes that ever ran in NASCAR, certainly in that era there for sure. We got 22 votes. Stream likes to interact with chat. You need to open it in a web browser. That's interesting. Okay. This is like a Streamlabs. I guess there's a different deal with that. Can I see here? Okay. I guess we'll go ahead and end the poll. Okay, yeah. Well, there you go. Boom. We'll end the poll there. Looks like Teams is the leader on that. Okay. That works. Yeah, that makes way more good point, Isaac. I think that makes sense. Kind of be able to work with some of these other sections here. I never think to really open this up at the same time, but we'll have that. Hopefully you guys didn't have the audio echo there. So yes, we'll do some driver excuse me. So do some teams questions here for the show tonight. Alrighty. So yeah, the Joey Logano paint scheme there I thought that was pretty cool. I know it's been done before. I know even Ryan Newman did it in 2003, but I thought it was pretty cool. I think it's not bad, especially since Logano's number has 2s in the number. So I guess it does. Donahue ran 16, but I was thinking kind of more Bobby Allison's Matador there that Haley Deegan did the tribute before. But yeah, I think it's cool to see. I think it's way better than the one that Logano ran as a throwback last year. I'm just pleased to see throwbacks of any kind, because I was starting to wonder, we're getting so close to Darlington, we hadn't heard anything, and then we just started to kind of get some news this week. The Ted Musgrave throwback, I think it was that Hill Motorsports is doing, looks really good. And then we had a couple more that were brought up this week. Oh, the Hut Strickland one. that Josh Berry's going to run. That's very nice. We very nearly had that in 2019 when Lastbro and I were over in Darlington, but unfortunately that was for the Circuit City 28 team that ended up closing the doors with Shane Lee driving. So that deal fell through. So it'll be good to have that one back out there. Alrighty, so first question here, folks. What year in the 70s, this is actually really well timed, was Roger Penske's first as a Winston Cup owner? What year in the 70s was Roger Penske's first as a Winston Cup owner? The answer choice is going in a poll too. They wouldn't be going in a poll. It's pretty much just letting you. It doesn't have multiple choice on this, but I guess I could, if we have. I think it has a multiple choice function on here. Maybe I'll look that up next, and we'll see if we can figure that out, because that might be fun. Oh, you got static on your end? Uh-oh. Okay. I don't think I'm stepping on the cable or anything. Hopefully, if I fill the air, I know it's worse when I stop. So I'm trying to kind of keep the ball going, but hopefully we'll be doing okay here. Yeah, I'm seeing the feedback on mine. I don't know what's doing that. The power cable was a little loose. I tightened that earlier, so I know it's not that. And everything here is buttoned up. So yeah, I'll have to give this another listen here after the show tonight. All right, 78, 75, 73, 69, 200 BC. Yeah, we got all the answers here. What year in the 70s was Roger Penske's first as a Winston Cup owner? The answer is 1972. 1972 is the correct answer. I'm glad it's not causing a big issue, because it's showing like a third of the way up the wavelength pattern on my Streamlabs. So something is doing it, and I don't know if the feedback, I mean, it must be something that's cranked up too high here. It's not that. Yeah, we're getting interference from somewhere. We'll figure it out. 72 is the correct answer. Disappeared for a few seconds. Yeah, I think I got to run my antivirus or something. I put an extra hard drive into this computer, and it's very possible that I probably screwed something up when I did that, because ever since then my sound card has not been the most reliable. So it used to be that I could hear the intro music and everything for the videos in this. Now I can't hear that, and now we got whatever's going on today. So yeah, tech talk here during the show tonight. 72 is the correct answer. Let's see. Alrighty. Next question. How many races did Neil Bonnet win for the Wood Brothers from 1979 through 1982? How many races did Neil Bonnet win for the Wood Brothers from 1979 through 1982? You touched something and it made the static disappear for a few seconds. Then it came back when you moved your hand again. That might be the mic cable. Maybe the mic cable screwed up, because I think that's what I was touching. Yeah. See, I'm touching it now. Is it not? If it's doing it again, I don't know. Okay, well, there you go. Now, of course, I bonked the mic with my knuckles, so that's even better. Okay. How many races did Neil Bonnet win for the Wood Brothers from 1979 through 1982? Whoop. Ah, shoot. That's weird. Okay, that time it was really, really low on the feedback. And then when I started talking, it went back up again. That's bizarre. Might be the headphones. Oh, no. I can't have that. I hope it's not that. It's plugged in. I mean, the headphones weren't very expensive, so perhaps you get what you pay for. This is another thing that you guys in the Patreon help with. If it turns out, yeah, something fries here and I need to be able to replace it, it's nice to be able to do that. So I do appreciate that for sure. How many races did Neil Bonnet win for the Wood Brothers from 1979 through 1982? The answer is 9. 9 is the correct answer, and a lot of you got that one. Isaac McCabe, looks like you got it. 12, 3, 4. I think, Isaac, you were the first one, it looks like. Maserati 9, you as well. Clint Will, there you go. Here we go. This is a good team question here, folks. What two NASCAR Winston Cup team numbers swapped drivers in 1996's silly season? What two NASCAR Winston Cup team numbers swapped drivers in 1996's silly season? That's just like a set about from. Yeah, exactly. Don't buy it from Kroger Marketplace. Yeah, pretty much. They've been holding up okay. I've had these for probably about a year at this point. I don't think they've quite gone to seed that quickly, but yeah. Well, clearly if they're creating a problem, then they got to go. So that'll be the plan. What two NASCAR Winston Cup team numbers swapped drivers in 1996's silly season? That's the thing, because I'm not hearing the feedback on here. So let me try this. Let me see if I switch inputs here. There's no time like the present. Nope. Switch it to 2 and it's still doing it. Yeah, it's not the headphones. It's not the headphones. When I unplugged the headphones, I was still getting the feedback. That's bizarre. What two NASCAR Winston Cup team numbers swapped drivers in 1996's silly season? This is one of my favorite features of the week, is doing the entry list storylines. I do enjoy piecing together who's in which race and which drivers to watch and stuff. It really helps get ready for the weekend's action. And it's so important now because silly season's every week now. It's not all season. And you got all these piecemeal deals from big teams and small teams and all-star cars and open teams. And it's just kind of interesting. The answer, which numbers swapped in 96's silly season? 98 and 37. Jeremy Mayfield and John Andretti. 98 and 37. Charles Peterson Jr., you were the first one on that. So there you go. Stopped for a sec and then came back shortly after you started talking. Some sort of audio back. There must be some kind of filter on. You're right. Performance mode. Preview is disabled for performance. Well, I don't know what that is. No, that's not it. It's got 3 filters? That can't be right. Edit filters? Noise suppression. There's too many options of this. Like, yeah, it'll probably... Knowing my luck with this, I'll probably end up making it sound worse. What I'll probably have to do, what I'll probably end up doing is I'm going to delete this track and put it back on there because it's just not doing it. It is just not doing it. That is bizarre. Okay. Anyway, next question here, folks. We'll just do a couple more here. Who owned the car Mark Martin drove for his first full NASCAR Winston Cup season? Who owned the car Mark Martin drove for his first full NASCAR Winston Cup season? I appreciate you guys bearing with me. We had a lot of people still in the show. I was worried once it started this way, we were going to drop down to maybe 6 people here after the beginning. But plenty to talk about for sure. I hope this comes across decently afterwards, but we'll find out. It might be this other cable here. I have this cable. The USB cable is on a pretty fragile thing. It's not the camera. It wouldn't be. I mean, it's more of an audio thing. No, doesn't seem to do. No, not that. Weird. Alrighty. Who owned the car Mark Martin drove for his first full NASCAR Winston Cup season? Mark Martin and Bud Reeder, Banjo Graham, Mark's wife, JD Stacy, himself. A lot of you guys, you're too good for this. You got it figured out. The answer is indeed Mark Martin, but I'll also definitely accept the Bud Reeder one too, because yeah, Charles Peterson, you're right on it there too. Mark Martin for sure. Alrighty. Look here, and here, and here. Dude. Wow. This is interesting. Brian Hallman just mentioned this on Twitter here. I used to work on a book, and NASCAR wouldn't allow us to use pictures of cars on fire or in the air. They said, quote, "It's not part of the sport we wish to portray." It's like, it's amazing how quickly things change. Although I guess there's a difference between publishing a book versus the broadcasts. Although, yeah, but that's interesting. That's interesting. That puts things in perspective for sure. All right. Okay. Let's see. We got top of the hour here. We'll wrap up here with. We'll probably just do this one more question here for tonight. Another Mark Martin question to wrap things up. Who was crew chief during Mark Martin's first NASCAR Winston Cup season? Who is the crew chief during Mark Martin's first NASCAR Winston Cup season? Might be the camera. Yeah, maybe it could be. Yeah, something's backwards. That'll be the next project here tonight. Just making sure this USB has got a little wiggle in it. That could be it too. Yeah. It does seem like the audio is not as responsive. I did turn the volume down a little bit because I didn't want the hiss to be that much louder. But we may have to make adjustments to that. Alrighty. Who was crew chief during Mark Martin's first NASCAR Winston Cup season? I guess one thing I could talk about I haven't touched on earlier in the show was the different drivers being brought into the NASCAR 75 greatest drivers. I don't really have any problems with any of them. I mean, you got Mike Stefanik in there, so that's cool. So it's not just Cup Series guys. I like that Sterling Marlin is in there. You got to get a two-time consecutive Daytona 500 winner. And just culturally, how significant Sterling Marlin has been. I mean, that iconic voice. I keep waiting for Ward Burton to get in there too. Apparently, during the broadcast, it said Jeff Burton's going to be in there too, which is great. Denny Hamlin. So we got some more current guys. Chase Elliott. Well, it was going to be inevitable that Chase is going to be in there, but and of course, the kids won a championship. At some point, that's going to get you into something. And certainly being a popular driver. Against all the memes, that's going to be true. I know there was some debate about Casey Kane because his career ended so abruptly with the heat exhaustion he had a few years ago. I still think Kane is tremendous. I think he was definitely one of the drivers. I know, in that time of the sport, certainly there were a few years that were more exceptional than others. When he first came onto the sport and he took to the sport so quickly, it seemed like the sky was going to be the limit. But yeah, I mean, there were just problems at Evernham and the program in general just seemed to have a problem from like 07 onward. And the merging with Petty Enterprises, he was kind of on the the loose end of that. But even then, he was still winning races amidst a lot of turmoil out there. He may not have been the top championship guy in an era where Jimmy Johnson was crushing the field, but I thought he was very, very deserving of that. It seems like they're kind of turning the corner towards drivers that are more recent. In the sport, obviously. I mean, since the original 50 drivers were declared in 1998. I don't really have any problem with the other ones they brought up so far. I think it's been a fine list so far. And yeah, Lastbro was definitely excited to see Marlin get in there since that was his guy growing up for sure. Who was crew chief during Mark Martin's first NASCAR Winston Cup season? And we got guesses for L.W. Wright and Harry Hyde and Steve Meal and Joe Namath. All over the place. All right, here we go. Who was crew chief during Mark Martin's first NASCAR Winston Cup season? The answer is Jimmy Fettig. Jimmy Fettig is the answer. There's another crew chief that goes well back into the career. But Jimmy Fettig is the correct answer. Did anybody get that? I don't think anybody got that. Is that correct? I mean, was Fettig his crew chief way back in the early 80s? You think of Steve Meal and you think of others from that period. But I guess it's one to look at. Oh, come on. Come on. Where is it? I gotta see this. Alrighty. Yeah, 82. It says Mark Reno when he was driving for Bud Reno, or for Bud Reeder in 1982. Then Larry McReynolds in the second half of the season. So, unless it's... Let me read the question again. Crew chief during Mark Martin's first NASCAR Winston Cup season. Okay, well, first, if it was the first 5 races... Yeah, then it still says Harry Hyde, but it doesn't show a crew. A Racing Reference doesn't show a crew chief for the first 2 starts, but for the next 2, it shows Harry Hyde. So Hyde might be the correct answer. Okay, well, that might be one that it got incorrect. Who knows? Yeah, I don't think Jimmy Fettig went that far back, but it does say, it says him here. Let me look up Fettig's page. That would probably be the way to go. Is there a crew chief? They have a crew chief page here, right? Yeah, there we go. Let's look up, let's do it the opposite direction. Probably a good question to end on here if it has okay. Yeah, it shows Jimmy Fettig as crew chief for Mark Martin is back as far back as 1986, but that's as early as Fettig's career goes. So it wouldn't quite go back all the way to 82. And Fettig is Edwards crew chief through 2014. So yeah, still a really long career, but not quite that long. So, okay, so it only goes back a little bit. I guess, again, when they programmed this, they didn't quite have the full statistic on that. So, yeah, there you go. But there you go. Oh, man, people are mad. People are so mad. How dare somebody say something about Ross Chastain? Oh, my goodness. You're going to get ratioed to oblivion by the guy that forced his nose in the middle of that wreck and middle of in a race that was too wide the entire day and took out all these other drivers. Like, okay, yeah, okay, sure. Anyway, well, I think that'll be a good way to wrap up the show tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. It is patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock if you're interested in joining that and getting some advanced access to the videos I post on this channel. 500 Days is the next thing that I'm working on here. The next 2 episodes of that, which I hope to release very close together. Some more details on that coming up here. My Twitter feed, at LastCarOnBrock. The website, of course, is lastcar.info. Still awaiting the results of technical inspection, but pending post-race inspection. It will be an Austin Dillon article tonight, and your race winner will be Kyle Busch. So we'll find out a little bit later this evening. So in the meantime, our next show is going to be next Sunday after the action at the Monster Mile. I believe that's our next race, right? With the Cup Series and Xfinity Series there. That should be the case, unless I am mistaken. I thought it was late April. Yes. So Dover, the Monster Mile, self-cleaning racetrack. We'll find out what happens, and we'll hopefully get some more news on the other stories that are hanging up in the air here, including what's to be discovered from both Blaine Perkins and Kyle Larson's car after the incidents that happened earlier this weekend. And again, great news for those that didn't hear about it earlier, that Blaine Perkins has now been discharged from the hospital. This being revealed by Bob Pockris about a half an hour ago. So we'll have some more news from there. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back here about 15 minutes after the race next week. Again, stay tuned for some more last place coverage. So have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you guys on the next show.